Welcome to Inside Outer Limits. Everybody, and welcome to well, it's not another edition of Inside Outer Limits. We haven't been on the air for a couple of months, basically because of problems with moving homes and illnesses and so on and so forth. But we are back now with this one-off hour-long special, just to get me and Philip Mantle back on the air again.
I am Chris.
Phil?
Good evening.
Good evening to you, Sarah. How are
I'm
you today?
absolutely hunky-dory.
Brilliant, that's great stuff. So how have you been? It's been a long time since we've spoken on the air, and yeah, I've missed doing it, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I mean, I can't complain. As you know, Chris, I always keep busy with something or another. So, you know, whilst we've not been on air, things have been progressing and working away on a variety of things as per usual.
Oh, so what's been progressing? You know, it's a very tantalising to say it that way, Phil, because we all want to know what you've been up to.
Well, you know, one of the things that takes up a lot, if not most of my spare time, Chris, is the various books that I work on. You know, I run my own, as everybody probably knows, my own little one-man publishing concern, Flying Disc Press. So keep that up and running. And you know, just as we came off the air last time around, I published a little book called The Mystery of the Utsura Bune, Ancient UFO Encounter in Japan, by a chap called, I'll never be able to pronounce this, I've been practicing, Shoikai Kamon.
That's easy for you
absolutely.
to say, Phil.
I've got my teeth in as well, and I still can't pronounce it.
Oh, you might need mine as well then.
So, you know, we've had some nice comments about it. It is an unusual little book. It's about an event that really did happen, you know, back in the early 19th century, the early part of the 1800s. I won't go into any great details, but it's a very peculiar event. And then, literally, as we speak, Chris, on November the 1st, we have a huge, great monster of a book, which is, you know, over 500 pages, called UFO Contacts in Brazil by Tiago Cicchetti.
Ah, right, Tiago. I thought it was pronounced Thiago.
But it might well be, you know. He's never.
That's easy
again,
for you to
I've
say,
spoken
Phil.
to him a number of times on Skype, and he's never corrected me, but he might just be too kind as to not say, Philip, you're saying my name wrong. But that literally comes out on November the 1st, and it is basically a blockbuster of the best and most interesting cases from Brazil.
Now, I must say, Phil, that I'm grateful for the review copy that you sent me, and I have actually started reading that over the last week or so, and I'm actually looking forward, because I do know that we are going to be speaking with the man himself very soon.
Yes,
aren't
we've provisionally lined up a date to interview Tiago, and you know, one of the things I will say, which I always have to emphasise to certainly American podcasters, is that Tiago does speak excellent English. He lived in the UK for a number of years. So you won't have any problem. I mean, here's us with our Yorkshire accents, me in the west, you in the east, and we're talking about a guy in Brazil and his accent. But some of our American listeners can be rest assured that they'll be able to understand every word he says.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that, because it'll be becoming easier for me and you when we interview him.
Well, the main problem you have when reading a book like this is the place names. You know, personally, I just gloss over them because I can't pronounce them anyway, and they don't mean an awful lot to me. Because he's not just talking about the main, you know, towns and cities in Brazil, some of which we may well know, but incidents in places we've never heard of before, Chris. And much of the book, of course, was never been in English before, let alone anything else. So, it will literally be out November the 1st. I have my copy sat here beside me, and I have read it, but that doesn't mean I can remember an awful lot of it, but I have read it. And,
Yeah.
it is a fascinating book. It's a huge, great tome. And I think it's a compliment to Tiago and his colleagues that have done the research that's featured in it,
Yeah.
And I'm sure anyone that obtains a copy will find it well, not just of interest, but of use as well. So there we go. That's out on November the 1st.
It's always good, though, isn't it, Phil, to be aware of some of these sightings that are global sightings, really. Do we have something similar that's happened in the UK? Do we have something similar that's happened in Australia? Do we have something similar that's happened in Brazil? So having these books come out are an absolute how can I pronounce it? How can I say this? It's like finding a gold nugget somewhere because you can compare different
I
sightings
think
globally. And as researchers, that's
I
what
think
we
the word
need.
you're looking for is essential to have.
That's right, mate. Yes.
No, but if
I told you my head
anybody
wanted this.
looks on my blog at Flying Disc Press, I'm not a blogger. I don't do updates and all this kind of thing. I just put information about the books on there. But when I set this all up in 2015, the ethos, if you like, was to try and publish as much information from other territories, other countries that perhaps we'd never heard from before in English. For example, the first two books I did were one from Poland and one from Romania. And of course, I've done Roberto Panotti's book from Italy. I've just mentioned another little one from Japan, and we've got Tiago's coming from Brazil. And if I get the opportunity to publish other works from other countries, then I'll certainly accept it.
That's great to know. And like I just said, they're essential to have.
Well, yeah, and one of the other things I've been doing as well is we've discussed it on here and we've interviewed people on this podcast, Chris, is the alien autopsy film. I published a book about it many years back, and I thought that would be the end of it. I've updated that book once, so I'm about to update it again to include all the information that's been spoken about around the so-called email dump that happened in June of 2019. This involved Kit Green, Dr. Kit Green, I should say.
Now, let's just remind our listeners what this is about, Phil, what is supposed to have happened.
Well, it's a list of emails. It's an email thread, and it involved Bob Bigelow, a billionaire, US billionaire Bob Bigelow. He ran an organization called NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Sciences. So copied in on this email list are people who worked at NIDS. There's Hal Puthoff, there's Colm Kelleher, and there's a couple more names in there. But it's all about Dr. Kit. His real name's Christopher, but he's called Kit Green. He worked for the CIA back in the 70s and 80s. He is a medical doctor. So some of the information in this email thread was about some of his work that he'd done at the CIA, which included, he said he had several briefings, one of which I think was in 1987/88. He claimed that he was shown an alien autopsy film that looked the same as the Santilli alien autopsy film shown on TV in 1995.
Let's get this right, Phil. The same or similar?
Oh, in this email list, it calls it the same. Not similar, but the same. And then he goes on to give his own professional medical opinion of the Santilli film and talks about a whole host of things, including some quite disparaging remarks about Santilli's PR folks, as he called them. In other words, Santilli's colleagues or his staff, or whatever you want to call them. And, at the end, he thinks that Santilli's film is authentic. It's real. So Richard Dolan managed to get hold of Kit Green and interviewed him, and has published items on that, and which is interesting. He now claiming in those items that the film he was shown by the CIA back in 87, 88 was a fake. So they was, for some reason, was showing him a fake. He also claims to have received about a dozen other alien autopsy films, only one of which he felt worthy of further investigation. And that turned out to be a poor unfortunate person with a disease called progeria, which is like this premature aging. But he claims now that the film he was shown by the CIA was a fake. However, in the discussion with Richard Dolan, he says that aspects of this fake film from the 80s are the same as Santilli's film in the 1995. Well, whether it's parts of it or whether it's the whole film, there can't be any connection between the two, because Santilli's film, as we know, and we've interviewed the gentleman in question, was designed and filmed and made by Spiros Malaris in 1995. So anyway, that's how it stands. But I'll let you know, for the first time, I too have been in touch with Kit Green, and he has given me a quote. He's answered a lot of the questions I posed him, in all fairness, but not allowed, like same with Dolan. Some of the things he was saying were not allowed to be published. He wouldn't allow the interview that was taped, of course, to be broadcast. So I'm not allowed. I don't have his permission. So I said, give me a quote that I have your permission to publish. And that was on the proviso that when I do the update of the book, basically the update's going to be one chapter, Chris, that covers this. I will send it to him first so he can see what I've said, and I won't change that. So that's what I intend to do now. As you I think you're aware, but others maybe, I've got a huge archive of material, research material I've got here about the alien autopsy film, because this was done, in the 90s, before the internet and before email really took off. So a lot of it, I've got a lot of paperwork. This includes letters and faxes from Kodak, from people involved, doctors, a whole host of things, and Santilli,
Yeah.
So my idea is that I will, rather than, summarize these things, which I have done in parts in the book, I'm actually going to print them in full. So you'll have a whole section probably in the middle of the book. Well, it will be documents, it will be photographs, it will be transcripts of interviews I did with people, and they will be there in full. So you can see what I've even kept some of my letters that I wrote to people like Santilli and so on. So it's going to be a bit like Calvin Parker's two books. It's going to be large format. And the text is going to be supplemented with lots of documents and photographs and things of that nature. And I'm working on that in the meantime.
That's excellent. Now, last time we spoke, we was on air with the show. I think it was a couple of weeks before the Outer Limits magazine conference, which was held in your neck of the woods, in Pontefract there, over in West Yorkshire. And obviously we've held the conference there, and we had a bit of a surprise at that conference. We had two surprises, didn't we, Phil? Do you want to tell us?
Well, one, Malcolm Robinson bought a drink. That was a real surprise.
I'll point out to everybody he's Scottish.
I hope somebody's filmed it somewhere, otherwise nobody will believe us.
I think it might be a rarity. It's like a sighting, isn't it?
Well, there was a number of surprises if we think about it, Chris. One, you had a surprise up your sleeve. You pulled Spiros Malaris out from behind the stage, so he was an unofficial guest and speaker. We also had the awards. You kindly gave myself and Malcolm award for almost like services to industry, the industry being ufology. And of course, Malcolm, for those who aren't aware, where we had the event is in an old Victorian town hall with the old-fashioned, sort of almost like a school hall in the middle, but with some nice, huge, great stage and a balcony. Now Malcolm was one. I don't know why, but he went for a wander around upstairs in the balcony, and he claimed to have seen a ghost. So that was another surprise. I believe Malcolm's talked about this and may have even written it up somewhere.
I think he has written it up here. It's in Outer Limits magazine in issue
That's
22,
right.
the last issue.
So there were surprises all round. There really were. But one thing that wasn't a surprise, Chris, even though you changed venue this year, rather than have it in the Freedom Centre in Hull, the one thing that has come across in all three of the events that you've organised and hosted is how friendly it all was. There's no egos. There's a nice mix of speakers, all talked about something completely different. We even had our friend and colleague Stefanos Panagiotakis. I've been practicing that. Come all the way from Greece. I make a short presentation on stage. I think you interviewed Stefanos. Stefanos is so enamoured with it. He's coming to Hull next year. He's already planning it.
Yeah, he's actually asked me where he can stay.
There you go.
So I've actually told him I'll let him know about available hotels a little bit nearer the date.
So that if you take away what the speakers were talking about, the overall atmosphere has come across all three of these events as being extremely friendly and informative, very relaxed, and people actually enjoyed the day.
Well, that's, to me, the whole idea is it's not just about presenting information and allowing people to become informed about these sightings or anything that goes in the magazine. It's about meeting old friends in an atmosphere that, as you say, it's not, there's no egos to boost or anything like that. We're all the same. We're all amateurs when it comes down to it at the end of the day, even though some of us are classed as experts. To me, an X is it used to be, and a spare is a water drip. So, it used to be a big drip. We're all there to do exactly the same thing, share information, meet old friends, and to say, now then, Phil, how are you today? How are you getting on? It's all about having a camaraderie and sharing information.
Well, and that's exactly how it's come across. I mean, I met old friends there, made some new ones, and it was a good day all round. And I don't think we could have wished for any better, Chris. I really don't. I'm not just saying that because you're the organiser. It is just a fact. You can ask anyone that was there.
Well, let's hope next year's is just as good. Now, quickly speaking about next year's, I do know this is the first time it's been announced on air that we've got yourself speaking again next year. We're talking, I think you're talking about Calvin Parker and the latest information about Pascagoula. Tell us about his latest book, Phil.
Well, yeah, I mean, I met Calvin almost 2 years ago now online. Published his first book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, which basically tells Calvin, and to some respect his partner who was with him that night, Charlie Hickson, tells his story of what happened that night on October the 11th, 1973 on the Pascagoula River. Now, when I first made contact with Calvin and when we agreed to do a book, I said, have you got any documents? Have you got any photographs? And he said, no. I mean, he said, everything I had was washed away in Hurricane Katrina. I think his house was under 8 or 10 feet of water, which is, unimaginable for someone like me. So as well as helping direct Calvin with the writing of the book, one of the things that I did was the research was to find the newspaper cuttings, the old photographs. And I didn't pester people, but somebody said, how did you find so much information, Philip? I said, I just politely asked the question. I'm working with Calvin Parker on this. Do you have anything? Any photographs, any documents, any newspaper cuttings, and so on. And I just made it a repetition. So you see the results of some of that in Calvin's first book. But of course, it didn't end there. And the questions continued. Plus, Calvin, for the first time ever, really, also started to speak at UFO conventions. He was supposed to be in Pontefract, but unfortunately, he took ill and couldn't make it. So, for example, he was at the convention in Laughlin, Nevada, where he met Peter Robbins. And Peter reminded Calvin that, he had been hypnotized or regressed by Bud Hopkins in 1993. So I managed, Bud's sadly no longer with us, but his archive of material is with Dr. David Jacobs. So I asked David if he had a copy of the tape of that session, which he did, and he sent me, and I transcribed it, and hey presto, it's in Calvin's first book. But who knew that it ever existed in the first place? Had Peter not reminded him, we probably would never have seen the light of day. Calvin's one of these is a lovely man, and he just forgets to tell you things. It's not done on purpose. So the research just continued after his first book was published. Then what happened was Calvin did a local TV news thing. I think it was for Fox 10 News, and it was, they run an 8 and 10 minute segment. Somebody put that on YouTube, and I was looking at it, and a woman had written a little, you can leave a little message on most YouTube videos. Oh, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night, and they saw this too. I thought, what? So I contacted this lady, and she put me in touch eventually with her mum and dad. That ended up being Mrs. Maria and Mr. Vernon Blair, and it was absolutely true. Mr. Blair worked in the fishing industry. Now the Pascagoula is a huge, great river, Chris. It's not some little thing that runs down the bottom of your garden. They have shipyards on it and so on. Now he was at the other side of the river on a little pier, waiting for a boat to come in with his wife Maria. They're driven out there. The boat was hours late. So he wasn't in the best of moods. When they both saw this blue light over the other side of the river, of course, that's where Charlie and Calvin were. And Mrs. Blair said it looked like it was either lost or it was looking for something. So the boat, started to come in. So they, in pitch darkness, hobbled along this little pier. And Mr. Blair went off in front because he's not happy. And then Mrs. Blair said there was this huge, great splash in the water next to her. Mr. Blair heard it, but he was, content on getting on the boat. And she said when she looked down in the water next to her, there was a strange grey man in the water. And she didn't quite know how to describe him. She said, no, it's not a porpoise or a dolphin, it was a man. And she said it went under the water and off it went. So she run like mad, threw the stuff on the boat.
Now let's be here again. Let's be clear again here, Phil. This wasn't the man from
Atlantis,
Atlantis, was it? It wasn't, him who was in Dallas years later.
I mean, she was petrified. So I think she threw Mr. Blair's belongings onto the boat, and he was off. And she said, what scared me most is that I had to go back down past this place on my own in the dark. Mm-hmm. So she went like a rocket. So we step forward in time now to we're putting Calvin's second book together, and literally we're at the last stroke of it almost. When Mrs. Blair rings me, and she tells me that Mr. Blair, he's been ill for a while, Chris. I've spoken to him on the phone, but he's in hospital, and he's having an operation the following day. And she's a bit flustered, and she says, he's told me something, Philip. He's never told me before. Mr. Blair, on the phone, told me that he had also seen this creature in the water. And it was the first time he ever admitted it. He hadn't even admitted it to his wife. And he said, not only did I see it, I saw it go back across the river, above the water, and he says, I saw the UFO take off. And he wanted to tell us, Chris, because, I think the operation was a serious one. Let's put it that way. Thankfully, he survived it. And then Mrs. Blair actually filmed him on her camera phone making a little statement about this, which I have. So, I mean, that came completely out of the blue. But it takes me back to when I first spoke to Mrs. Blair on the phone, and she's telling me about what happened. And one of the sort of parting comments was, Philip, she says, I always wondered if something similar didn't happen to me and my husband that happened to Charlie and Calvin that night. And so whether there's any more to that or not, I don't know. Mr. Blair is still very ill, and our thoughts are with him. But that was just one of the things that came out of nowhere. So, make of it what you will.
I think for Mr. Blair to come out as he has, in the situation that he was in, I think that is a massive statement from a man who may not have survived an operation. And I think really he wanted to support his wife, or be seen to be supporting his wife and admitting that, yes, I had seen it after all these years. It's a massive
He said he
statement.
just didn't want to be made a fool. He didn't want people laughing at him. And I can understand that.
Yeah.
And Calvin has recently met up with Mrs. Blair, and, they have talked about it. And, and Maria and Vernon were just two of a number of eyewitnesses that came forward, or if not came forward, we managed to find somebody would mention, I think so-and-so saw something, and we just managed to be able to track them down. For example, Calvin did a book signing in Pascagoula, and a chap came up to him, can I have a book, please? Oh, by the way, I saw that thing back in 1973, and off he went. And Calvin told me this story. Luckily, somebody was taking photographs at the time, and we had a picture of this gentleman buying a book from Calvin. And so we put that picture on social media, not once, but several times. Eventually, someone who worked in the town of Pascagoula said, I know who that is. I know one of his relatives. I'll ask if it's all right to give you out his telephone. And they did. His name was Mr. Lewis Lee. And again, he was on the other side of the river that night working in one of the shipyards, and he was a crane operator. And he said, but what was happening, Philip? I was moonlighting. I had a day job, but I was doing a bit of work on the side on a night to earn some extra money, which I think in those days wasn't strictly legal, Chris,
You're right. Okay.
So he says, as soon as I got in my cab, he says, and that cab's about 10 feet off the ground. He said, I could see this thing out across the river. And he says, it's the damnedest thing you ever did see. And he watched it for a good while, Chris. And the only reason he took his eyes off it is because he had something dangling on the end of his crane. And I think his mate down below shouted up, like, what the hell are you doing, So he said, I took my eyes off it, attended to my business, and when I looked back, it had gone. So
sorry, Phil, I was just going to ask, do all these witnesses then who saw this UFO on the ground or hovering above the ground, do they all describe it exactly the same?
Well, I think that the common denominator is that it was blue. It was a blue, illumination, because that's what Calvin and Charlie said. But they were literally had their fishing poles in the river. They drove up and parked up, and Calvin didn't know this area. He'd only gone to live with Charlie. Calvin came from a place 200 miles away. So on the way in, they passed a no entry sign, and Charlie said, don't worry about it. I go here all the time. So they're facing the water, and there's some blue lights come from behind. And Calvin's first impression was, it's the law, it's the police. We're gonna get a fine or spend the night in jail. So when he turned around, he expected to see the police car, but it wasn't. It was this huge blue illumination, which at first was difficult to see anything behind it because it was so bright. And of course, once their eyes got adjusted, they saw this object that was giving off this light, but it was blue. It was a blue light. So the common denominator amongst the other eyewitnesses was this blue luminous object, light, whatever you want to call it. And but we have sightings that come in both before and after. And there's even a special report written by, I think it's Walton Webb, in 1978. He wrote it, but it's about events in 1973. and it's on the QFOS website. I have a copy. And there was a whole wave of sightings across the states, Chris. Pascagoula just being part of them. Just recently, again, this is not written up, but we even have a sighting from where Calvin and Charlie is on the river. That is the Highway 90 bridge, literally. Go straight across the river. It's a huge, great bridge. So we knew of one witness that was in Charlie Hickson's book, which was published in 1983. So it really shouldn't have surprised us that other witnesses may come forward, because the location's not an out-of-the-way place, Chris. You know, it's not like Roswell in the middle of the desert. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've actually seen some images, obviously with the historical marker with Calvin standing there, and you can see the Pascagoula as a city or a large town in the background there. So it is more or less in the middle of a built-up
so
area.
one of the latest sightings that's come in is from a chap driving on the bridge, but it's a year later. Not exactly a year, it's a year later, and he said it was right above his car. You know, and he was actually on the bridge itself, driving on that bridge. I'll write it up and I'll send it forward for you for a little update for the Outer Limits magazine.
That'd be brilliant.
So all these things have been happening, Chris.
Yeah, I do know you know, I mean, you just talked there about historical events that had been written up about events that happened in 1973. Now we also know, and it's in Calvin's latest book, that there was a gentleman by the name of Philip Klass who investigated this, and you've actually included a chapter in Calvin's book all about this. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Again, on social media, a chap called Robert Schaefer was a skeptical chap. He says, I have an unpublished article by Philip Klass on the Pascagoula incident. So I said, that's great. Can I have it, please? So he sent me it. Again, I asked the question. It's a 3-page article. If anybody that knows of Philip Klass, he was the arch debunker right up until until he passed away, and so his stance was that it was a hoax. He bases this purely on the polygraph that Charlie Hickson took. Apparently, it wasn't with a suitable or a qualified chap at the time. Whether it was or not, it really doesn't matter, because polygraph exam's not admissible in court anymore anyway. But that's what he based it on. However, Robert mentioned, and I can't remember where it was now, but that Philip Klass's archive of material was a particular institution. So I contacted them, and he had a whole file on Pascagoula. And I think it's 100 and some odd pages long, which includes correspondence he had with people, copies of his own letters that he sent to people requesting information, and so on. I mean, Charlie Hickson, for example, appeared on the Dick Cavett show, which was probably the biggest talk show of its time. Whilst we don't have a copy of it, what Philip Klass does, he's transcribed it. So he's transcribed the whole TV show, but it was too big to put the whole file in the book. If you like, the 3-page article it condenses any relevance from his file. And when you look at his file, Klass is not trying to do any research, Chris. He's just trying to dig up any dirt he can to throw at mainly Charlie Hickson, because Calvin, as we all know, had disappeared, off the scene. So what we did, Calvin has his own website, and so the whole file is actually now on his website that anybody can download and access for themselves and read, of course. But I asked Calvin when I first found the article, I said, "Do you ever meet Philip Klass?" And he said, "Yeah, I met him only once." And he tells the story of Charlie was doing a TV show, I think in New Orleans, and he asked Calvin to come down, not to go on it, but just for a meeting. So Calvin agreed. And he said when he got there, Charlie introduced this fella. Calvin had no idea who he was. He thought he was some kind of scientist. But he wouldn't go on the TV show with Charlie. So in the end, neither of them This so-called scientist was Philip Klass. So neither Klass nor Charlie Hickson went on the TV show in question. Now, there was a journalist there, so he said, look, gentlemen, let's go over the road and I'll buy us all dinner. So Calvin's bemused by all this. So he said, by the time we get over the road, and to this restaurant, Charlie and Philip Klass aren't even talking to each other. They won't sit next to each other on the at the table. So the journalist asks Philip Klass, why would you not appear on television with Mr. Hickson? And he says, I don't go on TV with liars. So Calvin took exception at that, because if he's calling Charlie a liar, he's calling him a liar as well. And how can I say this? He left Mr. Klass in under no illusion that he shouldn't be calling him a liar. And
I can imagine the scene, Philip. Excuse me, Mr. Klass, there, but do you realise? Well, I can imagine.
And
exactly
he
what
says,
Calvin would have said.
because of that, they were asked to leave the restaurant. They didn't get any food, and Calvin drove home rather hungry that night. And he said that was his one and only encounter with Philip Klass. He said he never asked me any questions, never contacted me. Even though I'm sat opposite him, he's just calling us liars. So.
Not very impressive.
No, not at all. So that's another thing we uncovered just by asking the question, So from going from a 3-page unpublished article, we ended up with Philip Klass's whole file on the case, some of which is quite interesting, Chris. Even from a skeptical point of view, it's interesting to see how he worked. And then we have Calvin's recollection of his one and only meeting with him, which is, it just shows you more of Calvin's character,
Yeah,
And so all that's in his second book, which we call Pascagoula, The Story Continues, New Evidence and New Witnesses. The title says it all.
I've got to say, with these two books, we've actually got, I think it's just over 800 pages of facts, information, documentation, hypnosis recordings, all transcribed. This has to be, the Pascagoula case has to be one of the best ever documented close encounters of its kind ever that has been recorded, and this information compiled and put out by yourself, Philip. So I've got to congratulate,
it's not just me
you and Calvin on this. It's
yeah.
brilliant,
I'd agree with what you said, Chris. I mean, when I first talked with Calvin, he was even reluctant to tell me anything, and we've ended up with two stonking books, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that in any biased way. These are the type of books I would buy. In the first book, I put a lot of newspaper cuttings in it. And that was to show just how much pressure Calvin and Charlie were under from the media.
But that also shows as well, Phil, the interest from
absolutely.
the media in this subject. Because I do know in the first book that a lot of them are global.
Yeah, stuff from all over.
Yeah.
So in the second book, there is a few newspaper cuttings. There are some from the time, but there's also some from the coverage of Calvin coming out with his story as well. But what I did, and I was helped enormously by a chap called Andrew Hockheimer. Andrew now runs Calvin's website for him. Andrew had access to a lot of the old UFO magazines that were published at the time. So what I did, I put copies of articles from the UFO press in this new book. So you could see how the UFO research community covered it back in 1973 and so on. And I found that, for me, equally fascinating. And then, of course, found online, quite by chance, Calvin's first hypnosis with Dr. James Harder, literally done 2 days after the event. It's only a small clip. It lasts about 11 minutes. And Calvin didn't tell him an awful lot. Some people think because you're under hypnosis, it's some kind of truth serum. I mean, you've got to tell. If you don't want to cooperate, you don't. I know I've been under hypnosis. And then, of course, we jump right back forward in time to we found 2 more hypnosis tapes with not Calvin, but Charlie Hickson and Bud Hopkins. And these were from the 1980s. And one was, I think, 1985, the other was 1989, and
Hmm.
they mainly deal with accounts from Charlie's childhood rather than the main event. So they were, again, totally unheard of. And then, of course, on September the 14th, September the 14th, 2019, we had the opportunity of Kathy Marden to travel to Pascagoula and put Calvin under regressive hypnosis again.
Hmm.
Kathy is a trained hypnotherapist, and she just happens to be the niece of Betty Hill as well. It's written a number of books. There's a new book out now, in fact. So Kathy, travelled to Pascagoula, put Calvin under regressive hypnosis, and I must admit, I was, whether you agree with hypnosis or not, as a useful tool, you cannot criticise Kathy's professionalism and how she handled it. More or less the same night as the hypnosis was done, I had an audio file of it in my computer, and I transcribed it, and it's all in the book. And I said to Calvin, that's it. The book ends there. We kept moving the line. We were going to end it when
Mm.
Calvin had the honour of having a historical marker unveiled back in
Yeah.
June of 2019 by the mayor and the town of Pascagoula. It was dedicated to him and Charlie and what happened to them, official unveiling, all this lot. Calvin does a little TV interview. He's crying, and he said, you can bury me, you can scatter my ashes underneath it. You can bury me here. That's how much it
Mm.
meant to him. But then, of course,
Yeah.
we had that's where we were going to end the new book. The new book didn't start off as a new book, by the way. It started off as a revised edition of the first one, but we just got so
Yeah.
much info. There was no way we could do it. As you said, there's over 800 pages of stuff. So we ended it there. I said, I don't care if somebody, pulls an alien out of the fridge, Calvin. That is it. We've drawn the line.
We'll have to see Spiros about that one, Phil. Get Spiros to do
So that's where we finished it. And I listened to Kathy's hypnosis, obviously, because I was transcribing it. But she is, the consummate professional. That's the best thing I can say about her. She picks her words. She chooses her words. The full transcript of it is in the book. You don't have to believe me. You can read it for yourself. One of her main sayings is, what happened next? So she's not leading Calvin. Calvin, to his credit, a lot of the time says, I don't know. He doesn't try to make things up, doesn't try to
Yeah.
please the hypnotist. He just says, I don't know. And if she asks him again, he still says, I don't know.
Yeah.
And again, Calvin talks about two incidents when he was a young man, I should say a young boy. And then he talks about the incident in 1973 with Charlie. And then we move forward to 1993 when he's out on a little fishing boat with himself when another incident happens. That was touched upon in the earlier hypnosis with Bud Hopkins, but they go into it in a bit more detail in this. So, and it's all there, every single line. There's nothing edited out. It's there, every word, And like I say, make of it what you will.
And it's also nice to. I've had a thank you from Calvin for the support that we've given him from Outer Limits magazine as well, because I know we covered the three new witnesses. This will be the Blairs, no doubt, when they came forward we had that in the April 2019 issue, and we've actually got a front cover image of OLM in there. So
That's
thank you
all
for
right.
that, Calvin.
That's
and
all right, mate.
yourself.
But you see, we've
Absolutely,
had a
yeah.
little team working on this. There's me here. There's Calvin in Pascagoula. He's assisted by a lovely lady in Pascagoula called Rebecca Davis. She runs an organisation called On Main Street, which is a charity which highlights things that's happening. They do all kinds of events in the town. She's a big supporter of Calvin. And then, of course, although I spoke to a lot of the witnesses, the new eyewitnesses myself on the phone initially, the interviews were done by my colleague, Dr. Irina Scott. So I would pass on the detail. It just made more sense with Irina being in the States, and I was ringing them, and I don't even know what time it was there, And then we
Hmm.
were also assisted by a chap called Douglas Wilson, who's the MUFON guy in the area. And then, so there's a number of people have assisted. And it shows what can be done, Chris, when there's no
Hmm.
egos involved. All of us were combined, and we were all had the same aim, which was to just find out as much as we could about the various leads that we got, you know. And even,
Yeah.
even skeptics like Robert Schaefer, I asked him, and he didn't hesitate. He said, yeah, here's the thing about Phil Klass, and you can find the rest of his stuff at such and such an institute. I've forgotten the name of the place. I've got it written down somewhere, And we've got people from all over, Barry Greenwood, Jan Aldrich, lots and lots of people, Mark O'Connell, Don Schmidt, all assisted us every time we asked the question, have you got anything, on Pascagoula? If they didn't have it, they didn't have it, So, they're all mentioned in the acknowledgements of the new book anyway.
Yeah.
But it just shows what UFO research can do, Chris, when it kind of unites, if you like, around a particular cause. And we've seen the results of it.
Absolutely. Now, speaking personally, I mean, after the conference, which was a great success, even though Calvin wasn't there because of his illness, I know a lot of people were quite impressed with the documentary that you showed, and that's the first time it's ever been showed anywhere on Calvin's life. Well, not so much his life story really, but the incident itself. It was very well received by everybody that was in the audience.
Well,
that day.
it's the one and only showing of it, Chris. I mean, I've got it here. It's called Alien Contact: The Pascagoula UFO Encounter, and it's by Reality Films. They made that in the summer of this year. And it's the director is a chap called Jay Michaels. Just so happens, Jay's also one of the witnesses, although he was about 100 miles away. But he saw something that night, October the 11th, 1973. So, he had his own story to tell. That's how the documentary kicks off. It does interview Calvin, but it interviews Mrs. Blair. It interviews Louis Lee, Judy Branning, Susan Snow, and Mr. Blair hadn't made his announcement before this was made, so this will come out. The last they informed me will be February time of 2020. So the one and only viewing of it that's been seen anywhere was at the Outer Limits conference in Pontefract.
And that's another string to the bow, I suppose we could say, Phil. It's as I say, it's well worth watching, people. If you want to have when this comes out, January, February next year, I don't care where you are in the world, try and get to see it. It is an absolutely fantastic account, and it really does back up everything what Philip has already told you from the books, and it's fascinating to see. Now, myself, after the conference, as you know, Phil, I took a couple of days off just to chill out a little bit, but then I got straight on with issue 22 of Outer Limits magazine, and also starting to organise next year's conference, which we've discussed very briefly earlier on with yourself, coming along to speak and talking more about the Pascagoula and bringing everything up to date. And no doubt between now and then you might have some more new information to tell.
Well, there's always something, new happening. Like I said, we have an eyewitness account now from a year later on the bridge over Highway 90. Just recently, for example, a song has been written and recorded about Calvin and the Pascagoula case. A chap got in touch with me online. I wanted an introduction to Calvin's, which is no problem. There's a chap called Johnny Cobb. Now, John is a professional musician. He's a Grammy-nominated musician. Works with another chap called Jerry McCoy, who's a master guitarist in the Blues Hall of Fame. And, they sent me a couple of, what we'll call it, instrumentals. And said, can you use them in any way, Philip? I used a little clip online. I put a few pictures to it. I made my first attempt at doing a little, I won't call it a video, a little animation. And I just happened to say it'd be nice if we had a song. and off they went. So Johnny Cobb and his partner Johnny McCoy put together a song. It's called Blackwater Blue Moon, the Calvin Parker story. The saying Blackwater Blue Moon came up a long time back. Some chap online just said, Philip, we have a saying around here: when you have black water and a blue moon, strange things happen in Pascagoula. So that phrase is what inspired the song. Unbeknown to me, what they'd also done, they took a clip of an interview with Calvin, put that on it as well. So you get a few lines from Calvin in the song, and I like it. I've got to be honest, and I can't thank the two gentlemen enough. So hope you play it as well, Chris.
Well, I'll be happy to do that, and I will do that in just a moment. But I have to say I've heard this myself, and I'm not a person who's into what I would call country music, but it is a very, very, very catchy tune, and I quite enjoyed listening to it. So that's
well,
fantastic.
I spoke to Calvin
stuff.
about it, and I pulled his leg. I said, look, not only you're an author and a TV star now, you're a recording artist. I said I've had Elton John, Stevie Wonder, and Paul McCartney on the phone, all wanting to do duets with you. And he nearly fell off his chair with laughing. You know what I mean? So,
Oh,
but
brilliant.
it just any. You can download it. I think it costs about £1 to download it, but you can listen to it free online. You don't have to pay anything. So it just shows you how nice people can be.
Absolutely, yeah. We've literally got about 5 minutes left, Phil. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do a quick small announcement about the plans that we have in store for next year. The Out Limits magazine conference will be on September the 5th and 6th, 2020. And that will be held in Hull. We're going back to our home, as it's so called, the Freedom Centre, Preston Road, Hull. We have yourself, Mr. Philip Mantle, who's doing, as I said, something on Pascagoula. We'll have Peter Robbins, who will be speaking on both days. Now, Peter is famously known as being involved with Left at Eastgate and Larry Warren, but he's disavowed his association with Larry Warren a number of months back now. He'll be speaking both days. We have Jennifer Stein, who's quite involved with MUFON. She is involved, should I say, with a movie production company, and she is the person who helped to bring Travis Walton's story out in 2015 and helped to produce the documentary that he put together. We'll have a return from Mr. Philip Kinsella, who spoke in Pontefract, and he did go down very well.
He did, and rightfully so.
And we'll be having his twin brother, Ronald Kinsella, who will also be presenting. We'll also have Sasha Clare Christie, who's talking about her own encounter a few years ago now in Wales, but she's got a witness at long last to come forward to her own case, and they will be presenting something on one of the days. We'll also have from Hull Mike Covell, and I'm also organising one or two other surprises as well for the event, as I do my own little presentation as well. As people know, I do a top 5 or a top 10 rundown of the ufological events of the year, and I put that to music sometimes. I don't sing, so that's okay. You'll all be alright with that. And yeah, so tickets are available for that now, so if you'd like to get some, look for the magazine website and the Outer Limits magazine website, and you can get them on there. You can single day tickets or full weekend tickets. And I'm currently preparing issue 23 of the magazine, which will be coming out on December the 1st. So, what else are you up to, Phil?
Well, again, just planning. You mentioned two gentlemen there, Philip and Ronald Kinsella. Both of them have signed up to do books with me next year. I keep getting regular updates from both of them. I also have a lady by the name of Diane Tessman from the US with another book.
Now, those who regularly subscribe to the Out Limits magazine will know Diane Tessman because she has provided many articles for the magazine.
Yes, she has, and the topic of her book is her looking to the fact that UFOs are not from outer space; they are humans from the future. And I've also have a chap by the name of Andrew Hockheimer. Andrew also runs Calvin's website, but he's doing the definitive book on the Philadelphia experiment. He's a
Oh, right.
huge researcher into it and a huge naval researcher as well. And then we have Kevin Rendell, who we've interviewed on here, Chris, not that
Yeah,
long
we have.
ago.
That's right.
Uh,
I think that was the last show that we did,
yeah, and
actually, Phil.
Kevin is doing his favourite cases from Project Blue Book. So I'm
Ah.
working on all those as we speak.
And then next it's world domination.
Well, I don't know about that, but
You won't have the time for that,
yeah.
Phil.
So like I say, as we stand now, it's Tiago's book UFO Contacts in Brill on November the 1st, and also I have a chap by the name of John Steiger. Now, John is a UFO researcher in the States. He's also made a couple of little movies in the past. So John has actually written a trilogy of plays for the theatre, but all based on real life UFO events. First one is Roswell. The second one is Rendlesham Forest. And the third one is the Brooklyn Beach abduction with Bud Hopkins, Linda Corteil. So although they're based on real life events, real life encounters, the plays are fictitious. For example, Roswell, he takes Roswell to court. So the scene is based in a courtroom and you have the pros and cons. The Rendlesham Forest incident is based on an official judicial hearing into what went off. And the Brooklyn Bridge thing is based around a support group meeting. So these are literally the plays. So you'll have the dialogue plus all the resources where he's got his information from and end notes, the lot. And that's on the list to be published again next year with authored by John Steiger.
I certainly look forward to seeing that.
All completely different.
Absolutely. Bit like my conference. Now, just before I do finish, there is one gentleman who is coming to the event who you know a little bit better than I do, Phil, and he will be doing a presentation for us. Is it Paul Ascot?
Yes, Paul's an old friend of mine. We go back, way back. Paul was initially in the UK Army as a medic. I think he served in total both part-time and full-time in the military, something like 14 years. Upon leaving the military, he went into Civistry as a paramedic, did that for a number of years, then worked in the control centre. And Paul has written his first book, of course, UFOs, The Real Story. I highly recommend it. And Paul and I, investigated cases. We even had I witnessed something on July the 23rd, 1984, over a suburb of Leeds. I didn't know Paul then, and he saw it as well. So when we became friends some years later, that just cropped up in conversation one night. So we were witness to the same thing. And, Paul has recently retired. So it's now giving him the time and I think the confidence to dip his toe into writing more, researching more, and making his first presentation in public. So that's, again, something entirely different for the audience that weekend.